Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining this evening. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you a brief overview of the different types of surgery that we offer and how they work, just as a starter for 10. And then what I found is probably most useful is if people ask questions, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. As some of you may have kind of come to understand, obesity is a medical condition that is caused by a number of factors. It's not just about eating too much and not exercising enough, but it's a lot more complex than that. It is an imbalance of the energy that we consume and the energy that we burn off, but there's lots of things that influence that. I don't want to go too much into that unless, of course, you've got some specific questions for me. But I want to talk about the different types of surgery. Most of you, if not all of you, will have been through the Tier 3 weight management service, and you're on it already. And you know that includes a number of sessions from psychologists to maybe medical management of your weight-related medical conditions, to try and get you in the right place, in the optimum place to have surgery. Surgery is the single most powerful tool that we have at our disposal as medical professionals, and there is nothing like it. For the majority of people who have tried to diet and lose weight, they've fought an uphill battle. Most people who are considered surgery have struggled for much of their life, really. They've done everything possible, and you've still found yourself in this position. So one of the things that we are keen to do is not place blame on anybody. This is not about shaming anyone into kind of questioning or blaming them as to why they're in the position that they're in. But we're here to help. We're here to provide a tool that can help you lose as much weight as possible. And maybe we can talk about how we might maintain some of that weight loss in the longer term, and strategies and things that you can do to maximize the weight loss and the benefits from weight loss surgery in the long term as well. So when I meet people in the clinic, and quite a lot of you, I recognize some of your names, one of the things that I will be doing will be talking about options that are available to you. I will always start off at the kind of the least invasive option and then work my way up. And the least invasive option is to have no surgery at all, to continue with non-surgical weight management, and that is a legitimate option for you to consider. Surgery is not for everybody. I would expect that the majority of people on here to end up having surgery. But even if people go through weight management, some people go throughout the other end, come and sit down in clinic and say, do you know what, I'm just not ready for surgery, or surgery is not for me. And in fact, I had one gentleman who I brought back to clinic 6 months later, and he said, no, do you know what, I'm going to leave it, I don't want surgery. And that's a legitimate option for you to consider. Back in the day, we used to offer the Gastric Band, and I think it's important to cover the Gastric Band as an option because it is available outside of our NHS practice, and many of you will have been on forums and you would have heard a lot about the Gastric Band, and I think it's important for us to discuss it. The Gastric Band is an inflatable or adjustable device which sits around the top of the stomach, and it works by restricting the amount of food and drink you can consume. It doesn't really change anything from a hormonal level, but it reduces the number of calories that you can consume. Now, it's the least invasive surgical option that's available out there, but there's a very good reason why we as a group don't put it in. And many of the NHS services don't use it as an option. What we've come to discover, and the Gastric Band was probably the most popular device or approach to surgery probably about 10 years ago, when it made up of approximately half all of surgery for weight loss. we've now come to discover that the band in the longer term has its problems. It actually causes the greatest amount of problems of all the surgeries that we offer in the longer term. It slips, it causes difficulty swallowing, it causes heartburn. It's actually the least effective in terms of surgical options for most people. And for that reason, we just don't offer it. It's also very difficult to kind of get right. It's labor intensive. You need to adjust the band on a regular basis. And even beyond the 2 years, when we reach the end of our surgical care and surgical follow-up, there's still a lot of upkeep. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why we've kind of veered away from the gastric band. Then we've got the sleeve gastrectomy. The sleeve gastrectomy is the single most popular surgical procedure for weight loss and metabolic surgery anywhere on the face of this planet. It's become really most popular over the last 5 or 10 years. And it used to be the first part of a 2-stage procedure, part of the duodenal switch procedure. And what we began to realize is that after the first stage of the duodenal switch procedure, people were losing significant amounts of weight and they weren't requiring them to go on to the second part of the duodenal switch operation. So then it began to be introduced into practice. And because it's a relatively straightforward procedure to undertake, it avoids you having to operate on the intestines or the bowel. It's really attractive. One of the other benefits that we found is that the sleeve gastrectomy can help achieve up to 75% of weight loss, of the extra weight loss. So I've not described that properly, but one of the things that we look at is we look at how much extra weight you're carrying, and that's what we call excess weight. And any weight that takes you above a body mass index of greater than 25 is what we call excess weight. And that's the weight that ideally you need to lose. And we found that the sleeve gastrectomy is nearly as effective as the gastric bypass in allowing you to lose the excess weight that you're carrying. And for most people, the average is approximately 75% of the excess weight by about 12 months. And for that reason, lots of people are choosing the sleeve gastrectomy. Now, there are downsides to the sleeve that we can talk about, hopefully, in the Q&A session. But then the next step, or the next step up in terms of the surgical options that are available, is the gastric bypass. And there's 2 types of gastric bypass that we would offer. There's the full gastric bypass, also known as the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, or the 2-join or 2-anastomosis gastric bypass. And that's one that we've been practicing or delivering or offering amongst health professionals for at least 50 years. It's what we would call the gold standard against which all the other surgical procedures are measured. And it's the one that we have the most experience of. It's the one that we have the most information about. And it's tried and tested, and it's got some really excellent outcomes. And of the excess weight or the extra weight that people carry, on average, people lose up to 80% of that extra weight. So it's really effective. One of the downsides of the gastric bypass is that sometimes it can be technically demanding to perform, particularly if your body mass index is particularly high, above 55, above 50, above 60. And in that situation, what we have begun to think about is the other gastric bypass, or what we call the mini gastric bypass. And that's slightly different in that instead of having 2 joins, you have 1 joint. So it's slightly less involved. It takes a little less time to perform. But from our experience over the last few years, it's certainly no less powerful than the gastric bypass. But as I said, because it's a relatively new procedure, it can put some people off, and some surgeons will prefer to keep that type of surgery or that type of option, the mini gastric bypass, for specific cases. we certainly don't have the data or the research that we do have on the full gastric bypass that we've been doing for over half a century.